The stars burned cold and distant in the endless black, silent witnesses to the arrogance of empires. For centuries, the Galactic Dominion had ruled unchallenged, their warships carving paths through the void, their conquests unopposed. They had encountered countless species, absorbing some into their fold, crushing others beneath their boots. And then, they found Earth. Humanity had barely stepped beyond their own solar system when the Dominion's scouts arrived. The first contact was not a meeting of equals. The aliens spoke in clicks and hums, their translators spitting out demands rather than offers. Earth was to submit. Its resources would be harvested. Its people would serve. The Dominion had seen humans, small, fragile, divided, and assumed they were weak. They did not understand that humanity's greatest strength was not in their bodies, but in their refusal to break. The first attacks were swift. Orbital platforms fell. Cities burned. Millions died before the world's governments could even agree on a response. The Dominion expected surrender. Instead, they got defiance. Scattered militias fired uselessly at the towering war machines. Scientists worked tirelessly to decode alien technology. Soldiers who should have been broken stood their ground, buying time with their lives. The aliens laughed. They called it desperation. They did not realize it was the beginning of something far worse. Deep in hidden bunkers, in ruined labs, in the shadows of a dying world, humanity adapted. The Dominion's weapons were studied, their weaknesses catalogued. Their own technology was turned against them in brutal, improvised ways. A captured plasma rifle became the blueprint for 100 more. A dead alien's armor revealed its vulnerabilities. The humans were learning. And they were angry. The turning point came not from the generals or the politicians, but from the ones the Dominion had ignored. A mechanic, once dismissed as insignificant, found a way to overload a Dominion dropship's core, turning it into a bomb. A hacker, left for dead in the rubble, slipped into their networks and stole battle plans. Farmers who had never held a gun before laid traps that brought down entire squads of armored warriors. The aliens had thought humans were weak because they were not born warriors. They were wrong. Humans were not warriors, they were survivors. And survivors learned how to fight back. The Dominion's commanders grew uneasy. Their occupation was supposed to be simple. Crush the resistance, enslave the rest. But the humans did not crumble. Instead, they struck back in ways the aliens could not predict. Ambushes in the ruins. Sabotage in their own bases. Even their communications were no longer safe. The humans were not just resisting, they were adapting faster than any species the Dominion had ever encountered. Then came the day the war changed. A lone ship, barely space-worthy, loaded with stolen Dominion tech and crewed by volunteers who knew they would not return, slipped past the blockades. Their target was not a military outpost or a supply depot. It was a relay station, a hub for the Dominion's communications across the sector. The humans did not just destroy it. They hacked into it. And for the first time, the entire Dominion heard the voice of their prey. The transmission was short. No grand speeches. No pleas for mercy. Just 5 words, repeated in every known language of the galaxy: "You should not have come." Then the station exploded, taking a quarter of the Dominion's fleet with it. On Earth, in the ashes of their cities, humanity prepared. The aliens had thought they were weak. Now, they would learn the truth. The war was no longer about survival. It was about vengeance. And humanity was coming for them. The explosion of the relay station sent shockwaves through the Dominion's forces. For the first time in their long history of conquest, they faced an enemy that refused to die quietly. The humans, once dismissed as primitive and disorganized, had struck a blow that echoed across the stars. The High Command seethed. This was not just an attack, it was an insult. A species that should have been broken had instead bitten back. On Earth, the remnants of humanity's armies gathered in the shadows. They had no grand fleets, no towering war machines. What they had was cunning, desperation, and a burning need to make the Dominion pay for every drop of spilled blood. The mechanic who had turned a dropship into a bomb now worked with engineers to retrofit salvaged alien tech into weapons. The hacker who had infiltrated their systems taught others how to do the same. The war was no longer about holding ground, it was about striking where it hurt the most. The Dominion responded with brutality. Orbital bombardments turned entire regions into molten glass. Hunters scoured the ruins for any sign of resistance. But the humans had learned. They moved underground, through tunnels and ruined subway systems, striking only when they knew they could vanish before retaliation came. The aliens, used to crushing their enemies in open battle, found themselves in a war of shadows. Every patrol that went missing, every supply depot that mysteriously exploded, was another reminder, humanity was not finished yet. Then came the whispers. Stories passed between Dominion soldiers, hushed and uneasy. Some spoke of humans who moved like ghosts, appearing out of nowhere to slit throats before fading back into the darkness. Others told of traps, seemingly abandoned buildings that collapsed on squads, or harmless-looking debris that hid explosives. The worst were the rumors of humans who did not fear death. Who charged into gunfire with nothing but crude blades, dragging their killers down with them. The Dominion had thought fear was universal. They were wrong. One soldier, young and still unbloodied, asked his commander why the humans fought so fiercely. The answer was simple, because they have nothing left to lose. It was a truth the Dominion had never faced before. Every other species they had conquered had surrendered when defeat was certain. But humans? Defeat only made them angrier. Meanwhile, in the ruins of what was once a great city, a plan was taking shape. The hacker had uncovered something, a weakness in the Dominion's fleet. Their ships were powerful, yes, but they relied on a central network for navigation and coordination. If that network could be disrupted, even for a moment, their entire invasion force would be blinded. The mechanic grinned. Then we hit them where it hurts. The next phase was reckless, suicidal even. But humanity had run out of safe options. A small team, armed with stolen weapons and makeshift explosives, infiltrated a Dominion outpost under the cover of a sandstorm. They fought their way to the control center, losing half their number in the process. The hacker plugged into the system, fingers flying over alien keys. The Dominion's security protocols were strong, but not strong enough. A virus was uploaded. A silent, spreading corruption. The team did not escape. They died holding the line, buying every second they could. Their last transmission was a single word, now. Across the planet, hidden launchers fired. Not missiles, not bombs, jagged chunks of metal, propelled by jury-rigged thrusters. The Dominion's point defense systems should have shredded them effortlessly. But the virus had done its work. For 3 critical seconds, their sensors failed. The debris struck engines, weapon arrays, viewports. Ships that had ruled the skies unopposed now listed, crippled. On the ground, the remnants of Earth's armies looked up and saw their chance. The aliens were vulnerable. And humanity had learned one thing above all else: when your enemy stumbles, you do not hesitate. You strike. The Dominion's commanders, safe in their orbiting flagships, finally felt something they had not known in centuries: doubt. This was not how it was supposed to go. The humans were supposed to be broken. Instead, they were rising from the ashes like a storm. And the storm was coming for them. The skies above Earth burned. Dominion ships, once invincible, now drifted like wounded beasts, their hulls venting fire and smoke. The humans had gambled everything on a single desperate strike, and it had worked. For the first time since the invasion began, the aliens were on the defensive. On the ground, the surviving resistance fighters moved like shadows, striking supply convoys and isolated patrols. They had no uniforms, no grand banners. Just scavenged weapons, stolen armor, and a hatred that burned hotter than the fires of their ruined cities. The mechanic, his hands blackened from hours of repairing salvaged tech, had turned an entire warehouse into a factory. Crude but deadly replicas of Dominion weapons rolled off makeshift assembly lines. The hacker, her fingers still bleeding from the last mission, taught others how to hijack enemy drones and turn them against their creators. The Dominion had expected fear. Instead, they found only defiance. A lone alien commander, his armor scarred from battle, stood over the ruins of an outpost his forces had just reclaimed. The humans had abandoned it, but not before leaving behind a final insult. Scrawled in broken Dominion script across the walls were the words, "Run while you can." The commander snarled and ordered the place burned. But the words lingered in his mind. His superiors had assured him this was still a mop-up operation. A few scattered bands of rebels, nothing more. But he had fought humans before. He had seen the way they refused to die quietly. And now, as reports trickled in of missing patrols, sabotaged supply lines, and entire squads vanishing without a trace, he wondered if the High Command truly understood what they had awakened. Deep beneath the ruins of a fallen metropolis, the last leaders of humanity gathered. There were no politicians here. No generals clinging to old ranks. Just those who had survived the worst the Dominion could throw at them, and were still standing. A soldier, his face half burned from plasma fire, spoke first. "We hurt them. But they're not done. They'll regroup. And when they do, they'll wipe us off the map." The mechanic wiped grease from his hands. "Then we hit them before they can." The plan was madness. But so was everything else they had done. The Dominion's fleet was wounded, but not dead. Their mothership, a monstrous vessel that loomed over the planet like a dagger, still commanded the skies. It was the heart of their invasion. And the mechanic had an idea of how to stop it. The hacker had found something in the stolen data, a flaw in the mothership's shield system. For a fraction of a second during its rotation cycle, a gap opened near its main engines. A small gap. Barely enough for a single ship to slip through. The soldier laughed. "You're talking about a suicide run." The mechanic nodded. "Yeah. But if it works, we take their heart out." They had one ship left. A stolen Dominion dropship, modified with every scrap of firepower they could scavenge. It wouldn't survive a direct assault. It didn't have to. As the last volunteers boarded the ship, the mechanic handed the soldier a small device. "Plant this near the core. It'll do the rest." The soldier looked at it, then at the mechanic. "You're not coming?" Someone had to stay behind. Someone had to keep the fight going if this failed. The mechanic didn't say it. He didn't have to. The ship lifted off, skimming the ruins before vanishing into the clouds. Above them, the mothership waited, unaware of the storm coming its way. The Dominion scanners detected the intruder too late. The dropship, flying low and fast, slipped through the shield gap like a blade between ribs. Alarms blared. Guns swiveled. But the humans weren't here to fight. They were here to die. The ship slammed into the mothership's hull, breaching the outer decks. The surviving crew poured out, guns blazing. They didn't expect to live. They just needed to buy time. The soldier fought his way through screaming aliens, his stolen armor dented, his body bleeding. He reached the core chamber just as the last of his squad fell. The Dominion guards fired. He felt the impacts. But his fingers still found the device. The explosion tore through the mothership like a star being born. On the surface, the mechanic watched as the sky lit up. The Dominion's great weapon, their symbol of invincibility, cracked apart in a silent bloom of fire. Debris rained down, burning up in the atmosphere. For a moment, the world held its breath. Then the mechanic picked up his rifle. The war wasn't over. But for the first time, it felt like they could win. The Dominion had thought humanity was weak. Now their shattered fleet knew the truth. The humans were coming. And they would not stop. The death of the mothership sent shockwaves through the Dominion forces. Across the planet, alien troops faltered, their communications erupting in panicked chatter. The unthinkable had happened. Their greatest weapon, the symbol of their invincibility, had been torn from the sky by creatures they had deemed inferior. For the first time since the war began, the Dominion faced something they did not understand: doubt. On the surface, the scattered remnants of humanity emerged from their hiding places, watching as flaming debris from the mothership streaked across the atmosphere like falling stars. The mechanic stood atop a broken tower, his hands clenched into fists. It had worked. The impossible had been achieved. But he felt no triumph, only grim satisfaction. This was not a victory. It was the first step toward one. The Dominion would not retreat. They would not surrender. They would retaliate. And humanity had to be ready. The hacker, her face pale from exhaustion, crouched beside a flickering console. The virus she had unleashed during the attack had done more than blind the fleet, it had stolen something precious. Data. Schematics. Weaknesses. She scrolled through files detailing Dominion ship layouts, weapon systems, even troop deployments. The aliens had underestimated human ingenuity once. They would not do so again. A soldier, his armor still smeared with ash from the last battle, approached. "We found something else," he said, voice low. "Prisoners." The mechanic's blood ran cold. Deep beneath a Dominion stronghold, in cells meant to break the strongest wills, the survivors of humanity's first stand were found. Starved, beaten, but unbroken. Among them was an old pilot, his once sharp eyes dulled by pain but still burning with defiance. When the mechanic helped him to his feet, the old man gripped his arm with surprising strength. "Took you long enough," he rasped. The pilot had been there when the Dominion first arrived. He had seen their might firsthand. And he knew something the others did not. "Their fleet isn't the real threat," he whispered. "It's their homeworld. They send reinforcements from there. Cut the head off the snake, and the body dies." The mechanic exchanged glances with the hacker. A direct strike on the Dominion's heart was impossible. Humanity had no fleet, no way to reach the stars in force. But they didn't need a fleet. They just needed one ship. The plan was born in the ruins of a dead city. The old pilot, his body broken but his mind still sharp, guided them. The Dominion's own vessels could be turned against them. A captured dropship, modified with stolen tech, could make the jump to their home system. It wouldn't be a battle, it would be a message. The hacker worked tirelessly, rewriting the ship's navigation systems. The mechanic stripped every non-essential component, reinforcing the hull and rigging the engines to burn hotter than they were ever meant to. The soldier gathered volunteers, those willing to die for a chance to end the war. As the final preparations were made, the old pilot limped toward the ship. The mechanic barred his way. "You're in no shape to fly." The pilot grinned, a ghost of his former self. "Who said anything about flying? I'm going to teach these bastards what happens when you push humans too far." The Dominion had taken his world. His people. His future. He would make sure they regretted it. The ship lifted off under the cover of a storm, its engine screaming as it punched through the atmosphere. The Dominion's remaining scanners tracked it, but too late. By the time they realized its trajectory, it was already gone, vanishing into the void between stars. On board, the old pilot sat in the cockpit, his hands steady on the controls. The soldier beside him checked their weapons, crude, brutal things, meant for close-quarters butchery. The hacker's final gift hummed in the ship's core, a virus designed to cripple the Dominion's home defenses. They would not survive this. They didn't need to. The jump was rough, the ship groaning as it tore through dimensions. When the stars reappeared, they were no longer above Earth. They were in the heart of the enemy. The Dominion's homeworld glittered below them, a jewel of spires and lights, untouched by war. The pilot exhaled slowly. Beautiful, isn't it? Then he slammed the controls forward. Alarms blared across the planet as the stolen ship streaked toward the surface, its engines burning white-hot. Defensive turrets swiveled, but the hackers' virus had done its work, their targeting systems lagged just enough. The Dominion had thought humanity weak. They had thought Earth helpless. As the ship plowed into the Central Command spire, as the explosion lit up the sky like a second sun, the last thing the aliens saw was the old pilot's smile. On Earth, the mechanic watched the stars and waited. The war was not over. But the tide had turned. The Dominion homeworld burned. News of the attack spread like wildfire through the galaxy. A single ship, crewed by desperate humans, had broken through their impenetrable defenses and struck at the very heart of their empire. The command spire was gone. High-ranking officials, military leaders, and the ruling elite, all reduced to ash in an instant. The Dominion reeled. On Earth, the mechanic and the others waited for the retaliation they knew would come. But something was different. The orbital bombardments had stopped. The enemy patrols had withdrawn. The skies, once filled with the hum of alien warships, were eerily silent. The hacker tapped into intercepted Dominion transmissions. The words she heard made her blood run cold. Recall all fleets. Priority shift. Earth is now secondary. Suppress internal unrest first. The soldier frowned. What the hell does that mean? The mechanic understood first. A grim smile tugged at his lips. It means we just kicked the hornet's nest. The Dominion wasn't just an empire, it was a patchwork of conquered species held together by fear. With their leadership decimated, the cracks were showing. Rebellions flared across a dozen worlds. Slave races rose up. The invincible Dominion was suddenly fighting fires on all fronts. And Earth? Earth was no longer their primary concern. The mechanic looked at the ragged survivors around him. They had been hunted, bombed, and pushed to the brink of extinction. Now, for the first time, they had breathing room. But breathing room wasn't enough. We don't just survive this, he said, voice rough. We end it. The old pilot's sacrifice had given them an opening. Now they had to exploit it. The hackers' stolen data revealed the locations of Dominion shipyards, supply depots, and military hubs. The soldier proposed hitting them, hard and fast. But the mechanic shook his head. We don't have the numbers for a direct fight. But we don't need to. He pointed to the screen. We hit them here. The target was a relay station near the edge of Dominion space. Not a military stronghold. Not a resource hub. A communications node. The hacker's eyes lit up. Cut the head off the snake, and the body dies. The Dominion's forces were scattered, their chain of command in chaos. If they lost their ability to coordinate, their empire would shatter. The plan was simple. Infiltrate. Sabotage. Disappear. The soldier led the assault team, a mix of former militia, engineers, and even a few civilians who had learned to fight out of necessity. They moved under cover of darkness, slipping past Dominion patrols with the ease of ghosts. The relay station loomed ahead, a towering structure of alien metal humming with energy. The hacker bypassed the security systems with terrifying efficiency. Inside, the Dominion crew never knew what hit them. The soldiers' team struck like shadows, silencing guards before they could raise the alarm. The mechanic planted the charges himself, his hands steady. Then, as they prepared to leave, the alarms blared. A lone Dominion officer, bleeding from a gut wound, had crawled to a console. His fingers trembled as he activated the station's distress beacon. The soldier raised his gun, then hesitated. The officer glared up at him, defiance in his eyes. The mechanic didn't hesitate. He pulled the trigger. The charges detonated as they fled, the relay station exploding in a silent burst of light. Across Dominion space, 100 fleets suddenly found themselves blind. Orders stopped coming. Reinforcements failed to arrive. The Empire began to unravel. On Earth, the mechanic watched the stars and wondered if it would be enough. Then the first alien ship descended, not to attack, but to surrender. Its crew, a species the Dominion had enslaved centuries ago, knelt before the humans. Their leader spoke a single word, his voice trembling with hope. Freedom. The war wasn't over. But for the first time, the mechanic allowed himself to believe they might just win it. The surrendered ship was just the beginning. Within days, more came, fractured remnants of Dominion fleets, rebel factions from conquered worlds, even entire species who had spent generations under the alien empire's boot. They came not as conquerors, but as allies. The mechanic stood in the ruins of what had once been a human city, watching as the first delegation of the newly formed coalition stepped onto Earth's soil. Their leader was a towering figure, his scaled skin marked with old scars. He spoke through a translator, his voice deep and resonant. "We heard of your defiance. We saw what you did to the Dominion. And we knew, if any could lead us to victory, it would be those who refused to kneel." The soldier, his arms crossed, eyed them warily. "And what do you want from us?" The answer was simple. To fight. Together. The hacker had spent days analyzing their systems, ensuring this wasn't another Dominion trick. But the truth was undeniable. The galaxy was rising. And humanity, against all odds, had become the spark that lit the fire. The mechanic looked at the war map the coalition had brought. Dominion territory, once an unbroken expanse, was now fractured. Rebellions burned across a dozen systems. Their fleets were scattered, their leadership in disarray. But they were not yet defeated. The old pilot's sacrifice had bought them this chance. Now they had to seize it. The plan was audacious. The coalition had ships, but not enough for a full assault. Humanity had something better: guerrilla tactics, stolen Dominion tech, and an intimate understanding of how to break an empire from within. The mechanic pointed to a key Dominion stronghold. "Here. Cut this off, and their entire front collapses." The soldier smirked. "Suicide mission?" The mechanic nodded. "Pretty much. They didn't have the numbers for a prolonged war. But they didn't need to. They just needed to strike hard enough, fast enough, that the Dominion never recovered." The attack began at dawn. Human-piloted fighters, retrofitted with coalition tech, streaked through the void. The Dominion's remaining forces scrambled to respond, but they were too slow. The hacker had seen to that, her virus still lingered in their systems, a ghost in the machine. The soldier led the ground assault, his team dropping into the heart of the stronghold. They fought like demons, their stolen weapons blazing. The Dominion had expected a war of attrition. What they got was a knife to the throat. The mechanic was there when the final charge blew. The stronghold's core erupted in a storm of fire and shrapnel, the shockwave rippling through the battlefield. The Dominion's forces broke. Some fled. Some surrendered. Some fought to the last. As the dust settled, the coalition ships descended, their banners flying high. The war wasn't over. But for the first time, the end was in sight. The mechanic stood amidst the wreckage, breathing hard. They had done the impossible. Now they just had to do it one last time. The Dominion's last stronghold awaited. And this time, humanity wouldn't be fighting alone. The stars themselves would rise with them. The final stronghold of the Dominion loomed before them, a fortress world, bristling with weapons and shielded by technology older than human civilization. This was where the last remnants of the Empire had dug in, where their warlords and surviving commanders had gathered for one last stand. The mechanic studied the tactical displays, his fingers tracing the holographic lines of defense. The Coalition fleet hovered at the edge of the system, a patchwork armada of rebels, freed slaves, and human-piloted warships. They had come too far to hesitate now. The soldier stood beside him, his armor scarred from 100 battles. "They know we're coming." The mechanic nodded. "Good. Let them be afraid for once." The attack began not with a declaration, but with silence. The hacker had spent weeks infiltrating the Dominion's last secure networks, planting false signals, corrupting targeting systems. When the first wave of Coalition ships surged forward, the fortress world's defenses hesitated, just for a second. Just long enough. Human fighters, sleek and deadly, darted through the gaps in the enemy's fire. The Dominion had expected brute force. Instead, they faced precision. A reactor here. A shield generator there. Each strike carefully calculated to unravel their defenses thread by thread. On the surface, alarms wailed as the sky burned. The Dominion's warlords barked orders, but their soldiers moved sluggishly. Doubt had infected their ranks. They had spent centuries believing themselves invincible. Now, as the impossible unfolded above them, that belief crumbled. The soldier's boots hit the ground first, his squad fanning out behind him. They moved through the fortress like shadows, cutting down resistance before it could form. The mechanic followed, his tools as deadly as any gun. He bypassed security locks, rerouted power, turned the Dominion's own machines against them. Then came the heart of the stronghold, a vaulted chamber where the last of the Dominion's high command had barricaded themselves. The doors were reinforced, designed to withstand siege. The mechanic smirked. "Let me guess. They think this will stop us." The hacker's voice crackled over the comms. 30 seconds. The explosion blew the doors inward, sending shrapnel screaming through the chamber. The soldier charged in first, his rifle barking. The mechanic followed, his plasma cutter humming in his grip. The Dominion commanders, clad in ornate armor, turned to face them, not with fear, but with fury. One of them, taller than the rest, stepped forward. His voice was a growl, translated through a damaged vocoder. "You are insects. You cannot win." The soldier didn't waste time with words. He fired. The fight was brutal, desperate. The Dominion's leaders fought like cornered beasts, their augmented strength and reflexes pushing the humans to their limits. But the mechanic had spent this entire war learning how to break things. And these creatures, for all their power, were no different. He found the weak point in the tallest commander's armor, a seam near the neck. His plasma cutter slid in, and the alien's roar turned to a gurgle. The others fell soon after. Silence settled over the chamber. Then, from the ruins of the Dominion's command console, a voice echoed, not from the fortress, but from the stars. It was the Coalition leader, his tone triumphant. "It's done. Their fleets are surrendering. The Dominion is finished." The mechanic exhaled, his body aching. Around him, the soldier and the others sagged with exhaustion. They had done it. Against all odds, against every prediction of their destruction, they had won. But as he looked around at the broken fortress, at the bodies of the fallen, human and alien alike, he felt no joy. Only grim satisfaction. This was not a victory to celebrate. It was a lesson, written in blood and fire across the galaxy. The Dominion had thought humanity weak. And in their arrogance, they had doomed themselves. Months later, the mechanic stood on a rebuilt Earth, watching as the first true starships of a united humanity took flight. The Coalition had offered them a place among the stars, not as subjects, but as equals. As leaders. The soldier, now a general, clapped him on the shoulder. "What now?" The mechanic looked up at the endless sky, at the constellations that had once seemed so distant. Now, they were within reach. Now, he said, we make sure no one ever thinks we're weak again. And as the ships vanished into the void, the galaxy trembled. Not in fear. In anticipation.